Once upon a time, there was a prince whose name was Edward. Now, this particular prince had certain character qualities which prevented him from being very well liked. To put it bluntly, he was a spoiled brat. It was not because his father was a bad man or a cruel king. In fact, the king was quite a popular leader in civil affairs, but he had almost no notion of how to take care of matters of the home. Having been orphaned at a young age and brought up by counselors and family friends who had never given him any discipline of any sort, the king really did not have the right idea of how to train his own son. Now it happened that when Edward was about 14 years of age, that the king made plans to entertain some important emissaries from another kingdom. Not wanting his son to be in the way, for Edward's tricks had not entirely escaped his attention, the king made up his mind to send him away for a month or so to some relatives who lived on the other side of the kingdom.
Edward, I believe it will be necessary for you to go to your uncle's for a month or so. I have important business here at the castle.
But father, I don't want to go away. Besides, my uncle is stern and aunt is ugly and sometimes tries to make me help with work.
Now then, please don't talk about them like that. It's not something a gentleman of your class would say. I know you are just a lad, but you are the prince, and people don't like a rude prince. Anyhow, I'm afraid that I must insist on your going to your uncle's.
All right, but if I decide I don't like it there, I'm going to order a carriage to bring me home.
That was the end of that conversation. It was how many of their conversations had gone, especially when related to work. There was nothing that Edward hated more than work. He felt that it was a waste of his time and that he was too noble to be doing anything like that anyhow. Early the next morning, Edward set off on the journey in a luxurious carriage with 2 armed drivers. While he sat sulkily, as usual, in the back, the drivers had been quietly making plans.
We're coming up on the deepest part of the woods. This should be a good place.
I think we should wait a few more minutes.
We've nothing to worry about. The boy's never been outdoors much except in his own garden. He probably knows less about navigation here than we would if we suddenly got dropped off as sailors in the middle of the ocean by ourselves.
If you think so. Anyway, what are we going to do once we get him tied up? Just leave him here while we go for the ransom?
For, as you may see, they were planning to kidnap Edward and get a rather large ransom from his father. They had decided to blame the kidnapping on thieves, collect the ransom for themselves, and come right back to the castle with the prince. Eventually, when they got to a very deep part of the wood that was fairly distant from the castle, they felt it would be safe to carry out their plan.
All right, out of the carriage, you.
What? Are we already at my uncle's? I'd expected it to be a much longer journey than this.
No, you're not going there. You're coming with us.
What do you mean we're not going there? I thought that was my father's orders.
The idea of going to his uncle's did not seem quite so unappetizing as it had several moments beforehand. For the first time in his life, the prince actually had a reason to be concerned for his immediate safety.
That may be, but we've decided otherwise. It will all be simple. We kidnap you, you promise not to tell on us when you return. We get the ransom money, and you go home. Simple, isn't it?
Ha! You're crazy if you think I'll cooperate with you.
If you don't cooperate, you won't go home.
And don't bother trying to escape, because there's no chance you'll find your way back.
Just you wait till I tell my father on you.
Now listen, lad. We're willing to spend a long time here waiting for you to obey us, but we aren't interested in listening to you babble for your time. So if you know what's best for you, you'll be quiet.
Now the prince did have enough sense to listen to this, so he stopped talking. But not, however, without a dirty look on his part. So it went for several days. The prince remained quiet, but kept his resolve to not comply with the drivers. So the 3 of them spent several days waiting, just sitting around. Edward was just beginning to wonder if it really was worth all this when he realized he had a chance to escape. One driver had gone off to fish in a nearby stream, and the other had begun to doze. Common sense should have told him that he would be better off staying with the kidnappers than starving in the wilderness by himself, but he was lacking in that particular quality, and many other indispensable ones, because he'd always counted on others to make sure that even if he made a bad decision, the consequences would not fall upon himself. Therefore, he decided to make his escape. He waited long enough to be certain that the one was fast asleep, but not so long as to risk the other coming back before he could leave. Slowly and quietly, he crept away from the fire. Once he was convinced that he was out of hearing range, he began to run. Free! Free! At last he would not be stuck with those kidnappers. Or their food. Almost just after he left, Edward already started to feel the pangs of hunger. If he could find some other people, they would be able to feed him and help him get back to the castle. However, even once it began to grow dark, he still had not seen any signs of human life, for that part of the kingdom was sparsely populated, and its inhabitants were few and far apart. Just as Edward felt he could not move any farther, he saw a faint light in the distance. This gave him the strength to move on. As he came closer, he found that it was a fire. Suddenly, a horrible thought came to him. Perhaps he had been walking in a circle, and it was his own kidnappers. After a moment's consideration, he decided to continue towards it anyhow.
Anything would be better than starving out here.
However, he soon realized that it was not the two kidnappers after all. The fire was in a little clearing, about 20 feet in diameter. Behind the fire, there was a small cottage and a little shed with some hens and a goat in it. Next to that was a small plot of vegetables. In front of the cottage sat an old man. He had white hair, a long beard, and old tattered clothing. It appeared that at this moment he was taking a rest. The old man had not shown any signs of noticing his presence, so Edward planned to wait for a while to see what would happen. However, it was not long before his hunger drew him out into the open. The old man seemed very surprised at having a visitor and stood up quickly.
Sir, I'm very hungry. Do you have any food I could eat?
Well, that depends. What will you pay me for it?
I don't have any money with me, but
He was going to say that he was the prince, but thought better of it and changed his sentence.
I'm lost.
The old man stood still, as if in thought for a moment. Eventually he said,
All right, there's a pot on the table over there. You can have a bowl.
After eating, Edward asked if he might stay the night.
Well, you'll have to sleep by the fire. There's not enough room in the cabin.
Edward slept well, better in fact than he ever had on his bed of silk and feathers at the palace. When he awoke in the morning, Edward inquired about breakfast.
There's work to be done first.
Me? Work?
You? Work? I should think so. I'll let no sluggard stay with me. Who do you think you are, anyway?
When Edward did not answer, the old man looked at him closely.
You're a nobleman's son, aren't you?
Well, yes, that is to say.
He felt it would be best to tell the whole truth.
I am the prince, Prince Edward.
I see. Then how is it that you have come here? Is it now in the habit of kings to send their sons on long journeys through the forest on foot?
Not exactly.
Edward then proceeded to relate the entire story of his kidnapping.
Well, I can't help you to go home now, because my garden will need to be harvested later this week. Perhaps after that I can help you. In the meantime, if you choose to stay here, I will require you to work for me.
Edward did not much like that idea, but he knew that it was his only chance to survive, so he agreed.
Your first task will be to collect some sticks from around the edge of the forest for the fire, while I start making breakfast.
Some 10 minutes later, Edward returned with the smallest pile of twigs that the old man had ever seen.
Oh dear, that will have to do for now. Come have your breakfast. We'll finish that later.
So, for several days, the old man taught Edward how to work. Although he was progressing rapidly, Edward still found work to be boring. One day, while they were picking beans in the garden, he asked the old man a question.
Sir, it seems to me that when you do your work, you truly enjoy yourself. How is that possible when you could be doing things of much more interest to you?
Well, what do you think?
I don't know. I don't see any real point in working. After all, any time you do something, you'll know you'll have to do it again. Day after day, and year after year.
That's true. I think the reason I enjoy work is not so much about what I'm getting done, although there certainly is something satisfying about completing a large task. I think it's the one I'm doing it for, actually.
Who are you working for? I thought you lived all alone for years. Are you working for some nobleman? Oh, I know. You mean yourself, right?
No, actually, I'm not working for myself. If I were, like you are, and most other people, I would hate work. It would be just something getting in the way of doing something I enjoy much more. No, I don't work for myself. The one I work for is God.
God? You mean you're a monk? Doing all your work for God and not caring about anything for yourself?
No, I'm not a monk. But I do work for God. You see, it's because of him that I'm even alive.
The old man proceeded to tell Edward about the Bible and God's plan for the world, how he had sent his son to save the people from their sins. Having seen how much happier the old man was than he had ever been, even though he had lived a much harder life, Edward realized that there was truth to what he was saying. He decided to give his life to Jesus. After that, he began to progress even faster and found that work really was not as bad as he had thought. Before he knew it, the harvest was over.
Edward, are you in earnest about returning home?
I suppose. I'm sure my father must be distressed about me.
Well then, I believe we'd better go now. I shall be able to travel, since there's little to be done around here now that the harvest is over. I think I can help you get to the city.
The two went to the city together, and Edward was happily reunited with his father. The old man went back to his home, and they all lived happily ever after. That is to say, that is what would have happened had it not been for a certain set of circumstances which befell the two on their way there. Although the old man had not left that area for many years, he had an excellent memory and knew exactly in which direction the road was. They traveled at a rather brisk pace and were therefore able to be at the road by sundown.
I don't suppose you recognize this part of the road, Edward?
Edward did not, although his carriage had passed along that way shortly before his kidnapping. He had not been in the habit of paying much attention to things which were not of any immediate interest to him, so he had missed a great deal of the small but fascinating things of life. It was of no consequence in this situation, however. The old man was able to determine by the position of the sun which direction they needed to take. Now, in order to understand what happened next, it must be told what had become of the two drivers after Edward had escaped. Once they had realized that he was gone, they had searched around a great deal for him, but to no avail. When they had finally given up, they decided not to attempt to return to the castle. Even if the king had believed their story, that Edward had been taken by thieves, he would most likely have punished them anyhow for not taking care of his son. They felt it would be best to just remain in the woods as fugitives. By a remarkable coincidence, they happened to be hiding in the woods along the road, hoping to rob some carriage passing by, just as Edward and the old man were walking along.
Snapping snails. Look over there. It's the lad himself, and he's with an old man.
You're quite right. I doubt if the old man is a match for us. And of course, we know we can outfight the boy if he tries to defy us. Let's get him!
The two thieves jumped out of the forest and came upon the old man and Edward so quickly that by the time they realized what was happening, one of the men had already tied their hands and feet together.
There, I got them all tied up. Now they're not going to escape anywhere.
Or walk anywhere either. Unless you feel like carrying these two up to the castle yourself, you'd best untie their feet. We don't have the carriage anymore now, thanks to you.
Listen, it's not my fault. How was I supposed to know that it wouldn't work anymore if I took the wheels off for a fire? I thought they were some sort of decoration.
Are you that uneducated in the workings
Hold
of...
on. Did you say we're going to the castle? Where the king is? Aren't we trying to get away from him?
Of course not. Don't you see? We'll pretend this old man is the kidnapper. Once we turn in the boy, we'll get a reward. I'm sure the king's already issued one by now.
Oh, I get it.
A rare occurrence.
The two drivers began to carry out their plan. The group traveled all the way to the castle, which was several days' brisk walk away. Finally, they reached their destination. They then came before the king. At the sight of his son, the king leapt off his throne and ran to them.
What? Where have you been? I thought I had lost you entirely.
A band of robbers captured us, but we outsmarted them and took their leader. That's this man here.
Throw him into the dungeon.
But, sir...
Shut your mouth. I have no desire to listen to the complaints of anyone who would dare take my son from me.
The king's guards took the old man away. At that moment, Edward was too stunned to say anything. But after he recovered from his shock, he resolved to help the old man as soon as possible. Had this happened several months beforehand, Edward would certainly have forgotten all about it and let the old man stay in the dungeon. But a remarkable change had come over him during the past few weeks, and he was actually beginning to care about others. Edward decided the best thing to do was to tell his father that the old man was innocent. Unfortunately, he had previously had a bad habit of trying to confuse things by telling his father that certain criminals were innocent and that it was actually trusted officials who had done their crimes. Of course, it had not been long before the king had realized that they were, as he put it, just childish pranks. Needless to say, however, when Edward told the king that the old man was innocent and the drivers had been his true kidnappers, he was not believed. This meant that Edward could not use his influence as the prince to get the old man out of prison. He was, however, able to get down into the dungeon to at least talk to the old man. The guards let him in, feeling that he could do no real harm, for this particular dungeon was well guarded. To Edward's surprise, when he reached the cell, the old man acted as if his presence there had to be a secret.
I hope you're not getting along too badly.
Shh, not so loud. We must not be noticed.
Why not? I do have permission from the guards to be down here.
And if they notice you're acting as if I'm your friend, you don't think they'll be suspicious?
Well, I don't see what harm it would do. It's not as if I could set you free from here.
Actually, you can.
What? How could I do that? There are probably 36 guards around this place. Even if you could get out of the cell, you could not get past them.
You are right, but that is of no consequence. I have another plan.
What is that?
I can't explain now, but I'm going to need your help. Do you see that latch on the door? Yes, that one. I want you to open it and let yourself in here.
That was too easy.
Too easy for what? The only people allowed down here are the guards, and they're not going to let anyone out. Besides, as you said, the place is heavily guarded and no one could escape alive.
Alright, but how is my being here going to help you get out?
I need you to climb up the bars of the door. Yes, like that. I'm too old for that sort of thing anymore. Now, feel around on the ceiling for a little latch.
Edward found it and tried to pull as the old man had said. It was more difficult than he had expected, but after a moment's struggle, he won.
All right, you can come down now. You have activated a lever that would open a secret escape door in the wall if I press these 3 bricks in the correct order. Let's see. I think I can remember which order they were.
Look, it's a passage. It looks like it goes very deep.
Let's go. We want to get as far as we can before the guards find I'm gone. Alright, now that we're through, I'll put these bricks back up. It will keep the guards from seeing where we went immediately. We will certainly find the passage after an investigation, but this will give us more time.
They descended into the passage. It was very dark. In fact, there was no light at all, and quite damp from being underground. Had it not been a situation of saving his friend's life, Edward would have found it quite unpleasant. After a substantial time, they reached some level ground where the walls widened a bit.
I think I cannot go on now. There's a steep incline just ahead, and I must take a moment's rest.
Alright. By the way, something has been puzzling me. How is it that you seem to know this place very well, seeing that you lived out in the forest by yourself far away from here?
I was in this prison once.
What? Are you a criminal after all?
No, I was not in prison for something I had done.
What other reason is there for being in jail? Were you falsely accused of doing something?
No, I was the king.
Then you must have been the one who killed my grandfather. I thought you had been evicted out of the country by my father's uncle.
No, Edward. I did not kill your grandfather. I am your grandfather. My name is Edward as well. King Edward I. When your father was just a baby, a group of evil noblemen conspired against me. They came into my castle and threw me into the dungeon. I escaped through this very passage, but I suppose everyone must have thought they had killed me. I went into the forest and built a cabin. I was happy there, and certain that the new regime would never find me, so I planned to stay there for the rest of my life. That was how it was until last month, when you showed up at my fire and asked for some food. Until that point, I had assumed that the nobleman who had arrested me was still in power, but when I saw you, I could tell immediately that you were some relation of mine. You looked almost more like me at your age than I did myself. Therefore, when you said you were the prince, I knew that my son must have survived, and somehow taken back the kingdom. Of course, you know the rest of the story.
Edward was astonished at this and could think of nothing to say. So he remained silent. After a little more rest, they continued onward. As the old man had said, a short way ahead was a steep incline. At the top of this was a little door, and when they came out of that, they found themselves on top of a mountain overlooking the castle.
Do you think my father will believe your story? He didn't believe me.
I have thought of that, but I believe it will not be of great difficulty. He can easily verify my identity by my knowledge of certain secrets of the kingdom.
It was as the old man had said. They returned to the castle, much to the surprise of the guards who had not yet noticed their escape. After some initial doubt, the king was quickly persuaded that the old man was his father, and during the following days, there was much feasting and celebrating for his return. Edward became a changed boy. He left his old habits of laziness and foolishness and grew up to be a fine, educated young man. When he succeeded to the throne, he became known as Edward the Industrious for all of the accomplishments which he made. Several years after the entire ordeal, the old man called Edward to himself.
Edward?
Yes, grandfather?
I have been pondering our adventure of several years ago, and there is one thing which has been on my mind to ask you for quite some time now.
What is that?
Have you found what I have said to be true?
Oh yes, everyone knows you are my grandfather. My great-uncle even recognized you.
No, not that. I mean, what I said about work.
Yes, I have. In fact, now I sometimes would rather do something productive than just spend my time in leisure. Thank you very much for all you have taught me.